Hey there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of MCU Q&A, the weekly show where we take your questions about the Marvel Cinematic Universe. As always, I'm your host, Doug Herring, here to answer your questions, so let's get started. Okay, our first question today comes from Lethological02, who says, how long do you think the Sokovia Accords will remain in place in the MCU? And since Peter Parker presumably has not signed the Accords, how and why is Tony keeping Spider-Man out of the government's eye to keep him from signing? What about Luke Cage and the other members of the Defenders who end up in the public eye? Will the Accords ever have a presence in the Netflix realm like they do in the ABC realm, or are we assuming those shows take place before the Accords were enacted if they take place in the same universe as the movies? Great question. This brings us back to the age-old topic of the TV shows and the movies crossing over with each other, and sadly, we just have to accept some things aren't gonna show up. For example, we just have to accept that we're probably not going to get a mention of Inhumans in the movies for a little while, even though they seem to be a major political issue on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So we're probably not going to get a mention of the Accords in The Defenders or any of the other Netflix shows. That being said, I do think we'll talk about them quite a bit in Spider-Man Homecoming and other movies in Phase 3 like Ant-Man and the Wasp and Black Panther. Actually, I can see Black Panther dealing with the consequences of that quite a bit. And then I think the Sokovia Accords and who's a legal fighter and who's, a hero on the run, I think that'll all kind of be answered in Infinity War because everybody has bigger things to worry about. So by that point, it kind of won't be all that important. So I think all of Phase 3, from Civil War up to Infinity War, is going to be dealing with the fallout of the Accords and who is legally allowed to save the world as an Avenger and who has to do so outside of the law. One thing that the comics have had that the MCU really hasn't, except with a few characters, is the concept of secret identities. The concept that these heroes can't operate in the light of day. And so I like the fact that the MCU is bringing a little bit more of that into the movies, and the Sokovia Accords are a great way to do it, because sure, we all know who Steve Rogers is, but he can't fight as Captain America in the public anymore, so it might be an interesting way to. I think Scott Lang and Hope Van Dyne will both have to deal with the fallout of the Sokovia Accords in Ant-Man and the Wasp. And so even though they don't have secret identities per se, they're still unsanctioned vigilantes, which I think is a really interesting part of superhero movies. But yeah, by Infinity War, once Thanos comes, it's not going to matter. Okay, our next question is an important one. It comes from Alvin Marufo, and he says, I think the most important question is, where's Nick, and what happened to MCUEx? It's a great question. So if you remember back in June or July, we put MCUEx on temporary hiatus because I didn't have a co-host anymore, because people were moving and doing other things and all that good stuff. The same thing has happened, only this time I'm the one who moved. I'm no longer living in New York. Nick still is, so I can do MCUEx by myself, but I thought that the podcast was a good replacement. By the way, if you haven't checked out the MCU Exchange podcast, do so. It's on our YouTube channel now every Friday. But so, yeah, in terms of recapping the news, I thought that the dynamic of that show works better with at least two people, or even three. And so without a co-host, it's not something that I felt like I could continue and make it as good as I wanted it to be. So it's not, never say never. I'm moving again at some point in the fall, but yeah, for now, MCUEx is on indefinite hiatus. But, we are exploring other options, and hopefully we should have some weekly news show back on our YouTube channel sometime in the next few months. But until then, if you liked MCUEx and you miss it, I really encourage you to check out the MCU Exchange podcast. Those guys do a great job, and it's a very similar format to what we were doing on MCUEx. So thanks for your question, and fans of MCUEx, I'm very sorry, but don't worry, we are still keeping the YouTube channel going with lots of new and other exciting things. So yeah, that's that. Okay, Clint asks, if they were to do a Moon Knight show, would you rather they make it black and white if he was crazy, or keep it a mystery where everything he was saying about Khonshu is true? So for those of you not familiar with Moon Knight, he is essentially Batman in terms of his power set and the whole look and aesthetic and everything, except he wears bright white. But the other thing that's awesome about Moon Knight is that he suffers from schizophrenia, or at least multiple personality disorder, and he believes, or he is, doing the bidding of the Egyptian moon god Khonshu. But in some comics, there's some ambiguity about whether he actually is talking to an Egyptian god, or if that's just a manifestation of his mental instability. And so I absolutely think that if they were to do a Moon Knight show, they should leave it somewhat ambiguous whether or not Khonshu was real, or if he was just absolutely insane. However, when you're dealing with mental illness, you have to be careful. I know Split, the M. Night Shyamalan movie, it wasn't a bad movie, but some people had an issue with the way it handled multiple personality disorder, and I think that Moon Knight could be a similar case where if you make him too crazy, with a K, like not, if it's not an accurate depiction of mental illness, it could upset some people, and justifiably, I think. So, but I do think that done right, I think there should be some ambiguity about whether Mark Spector is just out of his mind, or if he's actually talking to an Egyptian god who's telling him to go serve out justice to people. But yeah, I would love to see a Moon Knight show. Moon Knight's one of my favorite characters, and I absolutely think Netflix is the right place for him. Here's hoping we get him in the next few years, and if they do, they keep it a little bit ambiguous. Not too much. I think they should definitely hint pretty strongly that it's legit, but at least for most of the first season, leaving it somewhat up to the viewer to decide, I think that'd be pretty cool. Thanks for your question. Chris Flistel asks, there have been announced 3 dates in 2020 for MCU films already. Which films do you think will take these dates? The first one in May, I think, is almost guaranteed to be Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. That is the only MCU movie that's been announced with no date. James Gunn announced on his Facebook that he is returning to write and direct Guardians 3, but there's no official word on the date. However, if Marvel's already starting to work on it, they've already hired the director and writer, that means that it's going to come soon, and May seems to be like the perfect month for Guardians. So yeah, May 2020, I think we can almost guarantee is going to be Guardians 3. The other 2 dates, I think it's May, July, and November. Marvel. I should have looked this up beforehand, but I'm doing it now. It's May, July, and November. July 10th and November 6th. The July date, I think, will be a new property, because what Marvel tends to like to do is spread out or make sure that they don't have a year of just new properties or just sequels. This goes back to 2014 when they had Captain America, the Winter Soldier as the sequel, Guardians as the new property. 2015 had Avengers sequel, Ant-Man as the new property. 2016 had Civil War as the sequel, Doctor Strange as the new property, and 2017 has Spider-Man as the new property and 2 sequels. So I think, and then 2018 has Black Panther, 2019 has Captain Marvel, so I think that'll continue. So that July date, I think, will go to a new property, and I think because the Marvel Cinematic Universe is going to get really cosmic in Phase 4 after Infinity War, I think Nova is a pretty good choice. I'm trying to think of any other cosmic characters that could definitely handle their own movie. And none come to mind, but then again, Guardians of the Galaxy probably wouldn't have come to mind before that was announced. So they could totally surprise us and announce something that we aren't guessing. So I'll go Nova for July 2020. And then November 2020, I think will be another sequel, and November seems to be a good date, a good month for Doctor Strange. And again, Marvel tends to go about 3 years between their sequels, so it just makes sense. They're also definitely planning a Doctor Strange sequel, even though they haven't officially announced. There was a story that broke a few days ago about Scott Derrickson likely to return to direct the Doctor Strange sequel. So clearly Marvel's planning one. Why wouldn't they? It's a huge success. So yeah, unless Infinity War does something totally unexpected, like set up a Scarlet Witch solo movie, I think that could happen, or maybe set up Vision to have his own movie, Or maybe they finally give us the Black Widow movie they've been promising. I think all of those are possible contenders for that July spot. But the May and November spots, I would go Guardians 3 and Doctor Strange, almost certainly. The July one will go to a new property, whether it's Black Widow, Scarlet Witch, Vision, or Nova. Nova's my guess, but like I said, I very well could be wrong. Thanks for your question. This question comes from Alex Barba. He says, if Marvel had to choose 2 characters from the TV universe to put into the film universe, what characters do you think they would choose? So I'm actually going to answer this question 2 ways. Which characters do I think they would choose, and which characters would I personally choose? Now, the first answer is the same for both versions of my answer. Daisy Johnson. I think I would love to see Daisy introduced. And I also think that's a strategically good choice for Marvel. Because I think that the concept of S.H.I.E.L.D., as an organization, can and should be brought back into the movies. But to do so, they need a new director, because I don't think Coulson's coming back anytime soon, if ever. And I think Daisy Johnson makes a lot of sense for that, because 1, they've been setting that up in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. 2, she's an Inhuman, which would bring the concept of Inhumans into the movies, which they desperately need to do. That's one of my biggest pet peeves about Marvel, about the MCU's continuity, is that Inhumans are this huge deal on the TV shows and they're non-existent in the movies. So bringing Daisy Johnson in as the new director of S.H.I.E.L.D. would make sense for the show. It would make sense for the movies. It brings S.H.I.E.L.D. back into the movies, bring Inhumans back into the movies. It's a good move, and so I want it to happen. And I think Chloe Bennett can handle it. She wasn't a great actor at the beginning of the series, but she's become a really solid actress. And I don't think she's ready to lead her own movie or anything, but she's definitely ready to have a small role in the next Avengers movie. So that's one character. Next character would be Ghost Rider, is what I think they would do. But I'm cheating a little bit here, because I don't think they would bring Robbie Reyes into the movies. I think the reason Robbie was on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. is because they wanted to save Johnny Blaze for the movies. So Ghost Rider, I think, is the character they'd bring in, but it wouldn't really be the movie version or the TV version. Although Johnny Blaze did kind of appear in that one episode of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so I guess he counts kind of. And then as for the other character that I'd like to see bring in, again, I'm going to cheat and just say the entire Inhumans royal family, because again, Inhumans need to be brought into the movies. It bothers me to no end that Inhumans are this huge, important concept in the MCU that are just never mentioned in the movies. So yeah, the entire royal family, bring them in. Well, guys, that's going to do it for this week's episode of MCU Q&A. As always, thank you so much for your questions. Please keep asking them. You can ask your question in the comments below, or you can email them to me at Doug@MCUExchange.com. You can also ask them on Facebook or Twitter. We're at MCU Exchange on all social media platforms. As always, like, subscribe, follow us on YouTube, all that fun stuff. You know what to do. And in the meantime, keep on being awesome, and I'll see you next time.